Hello everyone. We've just about got changing guitar strings done on most guitars now. The things we haven't looked at is a guitar with a Floyd Rose, which we're going to look at today, and acoustic guitars like we looked at nylon string, but we'll look at a steel string acoustic at some point as well. But Floyd Roses, these are something that confuse quite a lot of people and they find them quite difficult, but once you actually get used to using them, they are great systems. Basically what happens is you can lock your guitar strings at the top here, and then you can use quite heavy tremolo techniques and it keeps the tuning much more stable. You have fine tuners down here, much like a violin would have, that if you want to make odd sort of small tuning changes without having to unlock these. But what you're going to need to do this today, we're going to need an Allen key. So you've got a Floyd Rose or a locking style tremolo system on your guitar and you want to change the strings. Things you're going to need an Allen key or a hex key for getting to the top and at the bottom for changing these, a star screwdriver, some pliers and a set of strings I've got there. Okay, so the star screwdriver is for taking the back of the guitar. You've probably got a plate on the back of your guitar there. This is in case the gauge of the string changes slightly. What that will do is, the thicker the string, it'll actually raise the tremolo itself up, and we'll talk about this, but you've got two screws at the back here on the guitar that you can use to compensate that, and we'll look at doing that, because I think I've got 9s to 42 on here at the moment, which is a pretty standard gauge string. It's always worth, if you've got a Floyd Rose guitar, try and keep to the same gauge. If you know what gauge of string it is, try and keep to that. So, without further ado, let's start with, I'm putting the Allen key or the hex key at the top here, and I'm just going to take these off. So I'm taking them off completely. One thing that might be worth having when you're doing this job is a little pot or somewhere safe to put all these bits, because the one thing with this style of trem system is there's quite a few little parts, but I take these completely off. The one thing I forgot to mention as well when changing strings on any guitar, one of the vital things are to have a tuner. Fortunately I've got one here, so we've got a tuner as well. Okay, so I've taken my locking nuts at the top here, so now this is free. Whenever I move the tuning peg here, it's free to move, there's nothing locking this down. So I'm going to start with the thickest string, which is our E string, and I'm going to work in the same way as before we did with other strings. I'll probably work at one string at a time or a couple of strings at a time. It's not quite so important on an electric guitar because you can actually slacken all the strings off, and the truss rods are pretty good on these style of guitars. They don't tend to move too much, but let's do one string at a time. So, string winders are quite useful. I don't know if you've seen the electronic string winders or the manual string winders you can get, but with this technique I'm going to show you of changing the strings, you don't actually need, it's not that important because we don't have that many winds on our strings. Okay, so once I've wrestled with this, it's always worth watching as well with electric guitar strings. They can be quite sharp, so bear that in mind. You don't really want to catch your finger on them. Okay, so I've got him off at the top. Hopefully you can still see this in the video, but at the back of a Floyd Rose system or a locking system, we have these Allen keys here. These are just clamps, so again, a couple of turns. One thing I've noticed on a few people's guitars when I've spoken to them, they think that this has to be really tight down here, and it has to be tight of course to hold the string, but the problem is we're dealing with such small nuts and stuff that if you tighten it too much, you're just going to take the thread off, or you can actually damage the housing there. So do try not to put too much pressure on the nuts there when you're tightening them up. Okay, so I've taken the string off. Now, one thing you'll notice, if I can get the E string out. Okay, here's our E, the colour code, and these are rotor sound strings, not that the strings matter what the brand is. Okay, we've got a ball at the end of these for a standard string, and you'll notice with the Floyd Rose system, I don't know what I did with that string. Oh, here it is, the string I had before. I've actually taken that ball off, and that's what we're going to do again. So this is where the pliers, you know, said before we need pliers. This is where the pliers come in handy. So I'm just going to take that and cut about that amount of the string off. So you see on this, where you got the ball of the string, you've got all of these winds, and then it goes to the string itself. I usually take about 1 centimetre into there and just do a clean break. I've seen people actually use the ball at the other side, and of course with all of these things, this is how I do it, but there are many different ways. People have different ideas themselves how to do it, but I've worked with Floyd Rose systems and locking trams for years, and this is how I find is the easiest way to do it. So my string I've got left, we've undone this at the bottom here, so on this system here we've undone this as we took it away, and we're going to put him back in. We're going to insert this string back in. Try to watch, you keep that pretty vertical as you go in. You don't want it to be at an angle either way, you want it to be pretty much dead on upright, and it sits in there, and you can actually feel when it beds in, you can feel it hit the base. Now the reason we want that, we don't, because if you have it at a slight angle, sometimes it can cause, if you use the trem, it could put unwanted strain on that part of the string there, or even if it is at an angle, it can actually change the intonation, so you can find it can confuse the tuning slightly. So I've got the string there, I've felt it bed down, it's pretty vertical, and then I'm just going to tighten him up. And again, like I said before, these clamps, they're pretty good. I can feel it just taking there. So, it's not the best Allen key, it's a tiny Allen key. I've got a proper Ibanez toolkit somewhere for this, but okay, use the other side. Okay, and I've used the other side because I'm using even less force that side, and that's great. I can feel that's biting. I haven't put so much pressure on that it's actually going to damage the thread of the bolt itself. Now, we know this is good here. Then, when I come up to my machine head side, the tuning peg itself, we know we've got that hole in the machine head, so what I'm going to do, feed it through the hole, and I'm tucking him under here. This bar here just keeps the strings in line with the rest of the guitar as it reaches the nut. So it's gone under here. You have to watch for that more on the middle ones, because I can just take it under here. Here's you have to feed under, but we'll look at that. And I'm feeding him under. Now, our string's in position, we've got it through the tuning peg itself. As one rule, I like to get probably 1.5, 2 turns, even with this technique I'm going to show you of locking the string up. So I use my hand as a gauge here. I don't know if you can see that, but the string's coming under. My hand, this is going to tell me, still a bit of slack there, I've got a good couple of turns, so it's really going to hold that tight. Now this is the interesting bit. I've seen loads of guitar technicians use this, and before, for years, I've been using keeping a lot of slack, just turning right away from myself, making sure it was nice and neat, and getting a few winds and holding it in, and it did keep the tuning really, really secure. But this technique's been fantastic that I've learned. So what you do, you've fed it through, and then you bring the string back on itself. So you can see here, I've just turned it back on itself, so the opposite way there, and I'm going to feed it underneath. Sorry, and then I didn't do that very well, sorry. I fed it under the string. A little bit fiddly on electric guitars to get this, but once you get it, you're fine. So it goes underneath and up and under. I don't know if you can see that enough there, but I fed it back round on itself, under the string, and then pulled it up there. Reasonably tight, because I want that to look neat. And what this is going to do, keeping that tension on there, turning right, turning away from myself, again, righty-tighty, this is going to lock underneath. And then you don't need that many winds. Because if you can see that, I don't know if you can get, if that's quite close up there, but you can see the string is locked into itself. It's not a full knot, but it's as good as a knot. It's locking the string up so it can't actually feed back through, and therefore that keeps a really secure tuning. Now, we'll move on to the A string. We'll do that again and I'll explain. We'll do it really quickly on the A, then I'll do all the others without being on video, and then we'll look at tuning issues. Okay, Moving on to the A, really quickly we'll do this string and then I won't video doing the rest of them just to save time, but we'll look at tuning, how we're going to tune it. Okay, so I've taken my A string, again, standard A string. We've got this ball at the end, so I'm cutting the ball. And now I know this string is ready to go into that clamp. So I'll put him down there a minute. Okay, I'm just releasing the tension on the string itself. And again, because I use that locking method of wrapping the string round, I've only got a couple of turns and the string's off. It's not as if I've got loads of turns on there. And then to the right, I'm just going to unlock him. And again, I'm using the longer bit of the Allen key or hex key, because just so I don't put too much force into that. I always make sure that I'm not over tightening things. There's really no need, you know, obviously you don't want the string slipping out, but if it's reasonably tight, they generally don't shift anywhere. Okay, sorry. Okay, so there's my A string out. I've made the new A string ready to go. I'm going to clamp him down at the back like we did before. So again, make sure he's nice and vertical. One thing I didn't mention actually, which is worth perhaps stating, this Ibanez Floyd Rose is a great design because I can get to all of these even when the trem's sitting back. If you've got an earlier Floyd Rose system or an earlier locking system, you could find these spindles, these things, are tucked underneath. So you actually have to use the trem arm and get under like this. You'll see them sticking out here. It's not really a problem, it's just remember you've got to have your tremolo arm with you when you're doing this, your whammy bar, so you can get to them. Okay. This is a great design though, because they're easy accessible all the time. Okay, so he's in there. I make sure it's vertical. He's sitting in there really well. I'm feeding him under the bar here to keep the strings in place. Same principle, you know we've got the hole in the machine head or the tuning peg. He goes through there. Always with strings, try and make sure you don't put too much of a bend in them, so because you can actually put a kink in the string which can change the tuning as well and cause problems with tuning. So always be mindful that you're trying to keep the string as straight as possible. We're not putting too much stress on the string. Same principle here. We're going to put my hand underneath just to make sure we've got a bit of tension, we've got a bit of slack there. I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm bending the string back on itself, going under and pulling up, making sure I'm keeping my finger on there reasonably tightly, nothing particularly tight. Sorry, just put my finger there, it's quite difficult to show you with the camera as well. And then if you see this, there's not going to be, I think I'm going to get 2 turns maximum on this. It doesn't matter because the tuning's dead stable. It can't actually go anywhere. Okay, what I found there, actually just looking at it, not that it's going to matter, but it's just to make it look more pleasing for myself, I noticed I had a bit of slack there. So just make sure, it's because I was trying to get it on camera as well, you're keeping the string under a reasonable amount of tension, just so you've got no real gaps in the string. I've still got it slightly, sorry. Here we go. That's fine. It's because of that. Okay. Takes a bit of jiggling around sometimes. Once you get used to this, you'll be flying through it. Okay, and again, you know what we said? Only need, well, I'm lucky if I've got 2 turns. I probably have got 2 full turns. I have, yeah. But it makes no difference because of that system of it locking back on itself we did. So the key is turn it back on itself, up and under and up, and it can't go anywhere. Now, you are left with these as well, so I'll just show you this really quickly, and then I'll do the rest of the strings off camera. To cut these off, I'm putting it over the top of the tuning peg, the pliers, or the snips, and just snipping. Keeping it upright, and there we go. One thing you can notice with those, these are really sharp, and you don't want to poke yourself with those. So, again, I use the pliers, just the end of the pliers here, just grab the end, push it down slightly, and then again, use the actual pliers itself. this guitar's been well used, so it's got lots of dents and stuff in it, but if you've got a guitar you want to keep in really good condition, you've got to be really careful as well. You just don't put too much pressure and slip off there. But you see, by pushing those down, if anyone picks this guitar up from the neck, from the top here, or brushes against it, there's going to be no ouches. Okay, I've done all of the strings now, which is great. I love it when I put new strings on a guitar. I've made sure they're all nice and neat here. I did the same technique where it went back on itself, under the string and up, so they're all locked in. One thing I've noticed now I've changed it, the actual tremolo system itself, I don't know if you can see that, but you see it's sitting back a bit. It's sitting a bit too low. It should be, on a on the Ibanez Floyd Rose, there's a mark. It should be further up than this. It shouldn't be sitting quite that far back. So to compensate for this, I've tuned the guitar up roughly. This is where the screwdriver comes into place, and at the back on a Floyd Rose or locking system, you have these screws here. Basically, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take each back a quarter of a turn, perhaps. I'm going to do that again on each. What I try and do with this is keep this bar the same distance from the body. I don't want it to look, I'm trying to keep that pretty symmetrical, just because I think it helps with tuning stability a bit. Okay, so I've taken those, I've undone them a bit now. What that's going to do is make my guitar strings much flatter again. So they've all gone slightly out of tune. So I'm just going to tune those up. Now, because it's taken less pressure off the springs in the back, sorry, it's brought all the tuning down. The other thing you'll notice, it can be quite frustrating with Floyd Rose at first. You see, even though I got the E in, tuned all the way up to the top E again, and by the time I got to the top E, the strings were slack again and gone flat on these. It's because the more pressure I'm putting on these strings, the tremolo's rising slightly because the springs at the back are taking more pressure. So you have to do this a good few times, but if you've got a tuner, you can really do it quite quickly. But I know people have got unstuck with this and think there's actually a problem with the guitar. It's not a case of that, it's just a case of getting them all up to the right tension and doing it in stages. Once you've got them all at the right tension, it's good to go, it doesn't move them. Okay, we've got really small increments now. And you know, I only did a half turn on each one, so 2/4 turns, and already that tremolo is looking pretty level. The problem is, you see, I don't know if you can see, it's still probably, for my liking, sitting a bit too far back, so I'm going to do it 1/4 turn each again, and just tune it really quickly. And I'll probably have to do this twice, but for the purpose of this, we won't bother too much. Okay, so that trem now is sitting pretty well. I like it like that. The action's great. One thing, once you got it in tune, give them all a little bit of a wiggle, not too much so that you're going to put a bend in the string or anything. What this does, because they're elastic, they've got a elastic quality, the metal, they stretch in slightly. So by doing this, you know, next time you tune it, so I'm going to tune them again one final time, they shouldn't move too much again. So that's taken. Okay, I won't too much of this. And I'll tune it just again at the end. Okay, and then just to finish off, do you remember the locks we had at the top? They go back on. Ooh, they should go back on. turn it the wrong way. Sorry. Righty-tighty. And before I lock these down with the Allen key for the last time, I just do one last check where I check these fine tuners on here, and I just make sure they're roughly in the middle of the travel they've got on each bolt. I don't want them to be flat against the tremolo or too high, because then once you've locked it down, if you want to use these fine tuners, you can find you've run out of thread. So one last fine tune. And lock him in. Apart from I can't find my sitting on the key. You don't do that. Really unprofessional. And tighten, tighten, tighten again. Not too tight, so they're going to take the thread off, but tight enough I can feel it biting. We're good to go.